I suppose just before I do start, it's important to kind of mention that when I started writing and preparing this presentation, I realised it's actually quite a difficult slot to have, because many of you who are in the room will be delivering part of this work as part of our kind of associate community that we work really closely with. There'll be some of you here that have maybe commissioned work from us, so you've got a feel and a flavour of the work that we do. And then there's maybe some of you here that are more curious and have less knowledge. So with that in mind, I've tried to kind of think and plan this presentation as an opportunity to not only give a flavour of the work, but to really help and encourage and invite people to hear about this, and for me to showcase the relevance of the work that we do at Tavistock Consulting and the prominence of the model kind of 30 years on, that many people in this room have contributed to the legacy of that. So I hope that once we've kind of come towards the end of this, you'll see the real diversity of the work that we do, particularly within the NHS, and absolutely keeping the pound of the NHS firmly within the NHS, as we've heard earlier. So just a kind of bit of context that we've heard, and we've heard from many speakers already this morning to kind of help us think through this. As we've already heard from Charlotte today, the NHS is at a critical juncture. So it's not just in the kind of structural and leadership transitions that are on the horizon, but also the lasting ripples of the pandemic that we're all very, very familiar with. So according to the NHS Data Hub, around 1.4 million people are working within the NHS workforce in England, which makes it the 5th largest organisation in the world. And in the recent NHS staff survey, there was poor leadership and conflict with colleagues that are really significantly impacting staff morale. So it's really imperative that today we really do focus on the workforce in order to really be able to future-proof the NHS. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the approach. And again, like I say, many of you will be familiar, but for those that aren't, all of the work that we do with all the clients that we do is absolutely bespoke. We don't have the kind of off-the-shelf products that other consultancies may do. And we really take pride at Tavistock Consulting to really take time to understand your needs, to understand and think with you about a design of work that we can do with you to help your situation. And we cover kind of 3 broad elements when we're thinking through the work. Firstly, we work systemically. And as we've heard from Louise and other colleagues, so we really understand how a change in one part of the system, and in children's services, for example, how that can then impact other parts of the system. And we really hold that in mind when we're working. Secondly, we work with not only the leadership teams, with teams on the ground, and also organisational dynamics. So that's both at an emotional and a relational level. And this means that we're really specialised in managing change, conflict, and really managing uncertainty well, and being able to contain a lot of the feelings that go alongside that, as Charlotte spoke to earlier. And thirdly, we really work in partnership with you to absolutely co-create solutions to the organisational issues that we see at the surface. And as we've heard, our aim is to help you resolve these issues, so that rather than kind of creating a culture of dependency that kind of milks the NHS even more, we really work with you in a way to help you internalise the model and help to continue our work after we've departed. And that's some of the work that we've heard from Louise talking about earlier. So the way that we work covers 4 broad pillars that we can see here. And there's an array of ways in which we could support organisations, which are kind of in your handy pack. So please do have a look through the brochure. There's much more detail in there. But broadly, we cover 4 pillars of work. So there's team effectiveness. We think about organisational and system change. Think about leadership development and practitioner development. And in the next few slides, I'm going to talk through the pillars in a bit more detail and give you some examples of our work just to bring it to life a bit. So when we think about team effectiveness, as we all know, effective teams are really at the core of every single great organisation. And when we think about supporting team effectiveness at Tavistock Consulting, we really work hard to surface some of the hidden team dynamics that are present. That might be in relation to different relationships, some conflicts, and really support growth. and how some of these dynamics that are often very hard to speak to really do get in the way of a team being as most effective. And we do this in a way that is containing, as we've heard about before, that's not blaming and it's not polarizing. And we really know that how to try and really support teams in those situations. Thinking about conflict and mediation, we all know that conflict is a natural part of teamwork, and we've all experienced many types in our organisational life. And as we know, unresolved conflicts and tensions are often stem from much deeper psychological defences rather than just kind of operational disagreements. So at Tavistock Consulting, we really be able to kind of facilitate mediation processes that don't just put a sticking plaster over disagreements, but they really take time to get to the root cause of some of the kind of dynamics that might be happening in the wider system of organisations, and also within the interpersonal dynamics between individuals as well. And something that many teams approach us for at Tavistock Consulting is a request for some team development in the shape of an away day. And at Tavistock Consulting, we facilitate these sessions, and what's really important is that we try to understand why teams are functioning the way they are. What is it that is getting in the way of these teams functioning? Why are they functioning in this way? And how might this be supporting the task that they have, or how might it be hindering or getting in the way of the task? So just to give you some examples now of a kind of more of a case study around some of the way that we work with conflict and mediation. This is a case where we were asked by, there were two heads of service who were in conflict with each other, to the extent that the services that they managed that needed to collaborate for the sake of the task actually didn't even meet, and they didn't do any kind of collaborative work together. Patients ended up slipping through the net, and the staff morale was low, as you can imagine. And we were called in to carry out a piece of mediation work between these two heads of service, and it was understood that this was an interpersonal issue between these two individuals. And the consultants went in and started the work, and it soon became very clear that actually there were issues with the structural layout of this department. And it meant that the two heads were not even set up to be able to collaborate, but actually more work in competition with each other. And that was essentially at the root of the dispute that they were kind of trying to work through. As our consultants dug deeper with them and started doing more work, we found out that this kind of structural anomaly and this structural challenge actually was rooted in the historical conflicts around a different kind of hierarchy of professions, again, that we're all very familiar with in the NHS. And it was never discussed or resolved by the previous director, who had since left. And working with this hypothesis, the consultants worked with and supported the new director to really think about how to have a departmental restructure and to restructure the service in a way that it meant collaboration was much easier, and importantly really worked with the emotional impact of that. The leadership team were also provided with some leadership coaching, and we're now just kind of finishing our work with them as the team are finding their new shape. And as we can see, as some of the impact of the work that we've had, working relationships have now, and they continue to have improved, and they continue to improve. And of course, there's still work to be done. There's always work to be done. But we now feel we're able to withdraw from this work, knowing that the leaders have the eternal equipment. They've internalised the model, and they're able to kind of work it with a suitable structure and work with this in order to kind of move forward and develop with their team and collaborate and be able to kind of work across the two different services. The other pillar that I'm going to talk about now is around organisational and system change. So as many of you as colleagues in the NHS, you'll be very, very familiar with organisational and system change. And as we know, that the only thing that are constant, particularly in the NHS, is change. So often organisational and system changes are done to kind of increase productivity or efficiency, and can often be led as a very kind of operational task. And what we see is that usually the emotional and the relational aspects of organisational change are often given much less thought. The impact of this can be really quite significant. And we know from the work that we've done with colleagues in the room over the past 30 years that attending to the human side of change can really support the change becoming much more impactful and more sustainable. And it can help people really live through that change and experience that change and show up for that change, rather than it becoming a kind of desktop operational exercise. So the way that our consultants work is that we really try to understand what is happening in the organisation. We try to make some hypotheses with each other about different team dynamics, or about different leadership culture, or about what might be resistance to, or what might be coming into people resisting the change. And we really try to understand what is driving people's behaviour, as we've heard both above and below the surface, as we've heard today. And as we all know, around about 70% of change efforts fail. So by understanding the drivers of the behaviour and the culture of their organisation, our consultancy can really help support a much more impactful and meaningful change within any organisation. So one example I'm going to kind of give to bring this to life a bit is something that often happens is an organisation might come to us and things feel very difficult for them. And they know that there's some change that's necessary, but they're not just quite sure what the change is or how the change needs to happen. So an example of this is when we were approached by a kind of maternity unit that had recently undergone a poor CQC inspection. And as we can all understand and feel, the poor inspection can feel like a real kind of heavy weight, and staff morale was at an all-time low in this ward. The leadership were really struggling with uncertainty, and they knew that changes really needed to happen, but they just didn't know where to start. And one of the things that we really try to do as we approach organisations is we really try to think about the task that this organisation is taking and is attending to, and what it is that they're doing as part of their job. And we were really kind of mindful that maternity care is very complex. It's built on relationships, and it's built on trust, and it's built you have to have the ability to work under really quite intense pressure and absolutely faced with the real realities of life and death daily. And as we know that when issues arise, whether it's in a kind of leadership or communication or in morale, it's really just about the processes and the policies that were in place on this ward. And what we really wanted to try and think about is, how are people feeling? How are they relating to each other? And how are the underlying anxieties of the work, of the task that they are attending to every day, how do those underlying anxieties impact decision making and impact the way that the team is able to kind of work together? And as we know, a poor inspection report is often a symptom of much deeper systemic issues rather than just kind of isolated problems. And this is where our model, or the system psychodynamic frame, can really help surface some of these challenges, so we can really start to kind of work through these. As part of this work with this trust, we suggested to start with a diagnostic assessment phase. And this involved one-to-one interviews with many different staff across the ward, the unit. And the aim was really to try and gain an understanding of the workings of the unit from different perspectives, and to gather ideas and to think about the different problem areas and the different areas that we needed to change. When we carry out organisational diagnostics at Tavistock Consulting, we often find that this is the beginning stage of our work. It's not just a discrete set of interviews that we're gathering data. This is the beginning. This is where we start the work, and this is how we start really trying to understand some of the dynamics that are at play. Some of the themes that emerged in this piece of work was, and we often see, an overwhelming pride from the staff about the work that they were doing. And there was an overwhelming sense of pride for the way in which they supported the community that they worked with as well, even within the additional pressure that this unit were under. Staff also really talked about the very high risks that their client group often presented with, and how this was so hard to manage with the limited resources that they had on the ward. And it was a really difficult one to balance with the societal expectations on this ward of them delivering the most perfect care to these women, the most perfect way in which they support women through labour and through their maternity. And interestingly, I think as many of you will know, this is often comes up in our work with kind of helping organisations. We find that society has a really kind of often very unrealistic expectation of what maybe a child protection team or an A&E department are able to do. And I think that can often cause additional stress for the workers and for the workforce that are in the organisation. We worked really closely with this department to really try and think about the leadership team dynamics, and we fed back a lot of the work that we'd done within our diagnostic phase. And we worked with the maternity unit to really try to co-create some targeted, realistic and really emotionally intelligent schedule of support for this unit. And this included some leadership coaching, which we've heard about. We had some structured team coaching as well, so really helping the team come together and function and to think about what was kind of coming into them and how things were being played out for them. And we really helped to support them to write up some strategies to really rebuild trust and improve collaboration across all the different staff groups. Our goal, as I mentioned earlier, was not just to help them do well in the next inspection, but to really try and help create a healthier, more resilient working environment where staff felt genuinely valued and supported. And through this work, we really did see quite a remarkable transformation in the ward. The staff engagement increased quite significantly, the communication improved, and most importantly, morale lifted for the team. When the next CQC inspection came in, the results of that had shown improvement, but they reflected not just the kind of surface level improvements, but it reflected the deep systemic changes that had taken place, not just in compliance with different policies, but the culture of the leadership and the way in which people were working on the ward. And this case study, I think, really does amplify the kind of the power of the Tavistock approach. So we really help organisations not only see their challenges clearly, but really try to help them navigate those with confidence, with emotional intelligence, and with long-term sustainable impact. So the way in which we would support leadership development. As many people in here know, leadership can be a very lonely place a lot of the time. Leaders are often expected to have all of the answers, but we don't always have the support to think through this, or the space, or the time, or the capacity even to think. We need thinking partners. We need people who are both there to support us, but also to challenge us as well, and to really help embed this new thinking in the work, which is really important. I think leading in the NHS can be particularly challenging. We need leaders that are being adaptive to change, but we also want them to lead resilient teams and lead through uncertainty. And all of this can present as a real challenge, particularly with what we have on the horizon for the NHS. At Tavistock Consulting, we've got considerable experience of working with executives. We've heard from a couple of Louise and Matthew earlier this morning, and we've also heard from some of the other work that we've done with different executive teams. We have a real emphasis on really supporting to make resilient systems that focus on rather than resilient individuals. So we really try and see our coaching offer as a fundamental way of being able to do this. Because our approach enables clients to not only think through the emotional responses to the leadership that they're experiencing, but also the wider organisational dynamics that are at play. The executives that we coach tell us that the breadth and also the depth of our work has a real impact on them, and really being able to internalise some of this thinking really helps them lead with much more confidence and with the emotional intelligence to be much more impactful in their work. So the success of our work with executive leaders has really kind of prompted us to develop some seminars and some programs for leaders to learn much more about our approach. And so we run development seminars and leadership programs to really support leaders to really kind of incorporate some of this thinking into their leadership. So if you would like to hear any more about this and the way in which we kind of run these sessions, then please come and find one of us in the break or throughout the session, and we'd be really delighted to kind of speak to you a bit more about the way that we can support this. I'll just give you an example now of some executive team coaching and consultancy that we provided. So this is from one of the members of one of the large NHS trust teams approached us, and like so many leadership teams, but particularly in the NHS, really felt that they'd kind of had got quite fragmented in their leadership team, and they were working in a really kind of siloed way. Departments were kind of operating in quite isolated ways. There was quite minimal collaboration between the two, and tensions were really rising around between the senior leaders. The pandemic had really exacerbated the situation, and despite their best efforts, the organisation was really missing out on different opportunities for innovation. It was missing out on different ways of being efficient, and cohesion was just almost non-existent. And as we know from a lot of the work that we do with different executive teams, a fragmented executive team can really kind of create a ripple throughout the whole organisation. There's lots of inefficiencies, there's different misaligned priorities, and there's essentially a really quite disengaged workforce. So the challenge here wasn't just about improving the communication, it was really trying to understand the deeper dynamics that were happening and to really try and support some sustainable cultural change with this organisation. So in order to get below the surface, as we've heard, of some of these siloed dynamics, we worked with each member separately to really try to understand their experiences, their concerns, and the different perspectives that they might be holding for the group. And by doing this, with the intensive way in which we worked with them, it really allowed us to surface some of the kind of previously unspoken dynamics with this executive team. And leading to there were some hidden tensions, and there was an underlying culture within the executive team that previously hadn't really been spoken to. So we worked with them as a whole to try and really gain a sense of the organisational culture and really try and understand a bit more about how they were kind of becoming misaligned. And over the next year, we worked with the executive team as they mapped their path and mapped their strategy. And we offered containment, as we've heard from Charlotte today, and support to really try and tackle some of the dynamics and the team dynamics along the way. And by the end of our work with them, the team had transformed their trust from being in the high 50s to one of the top 5 performing NHS trusts in the UK. So I guess the invitation here is to really think whether there's an executive team that you're working with. If you're working in similar challenges, please do come and speak with one of us and see how we might be able to help. Because with the right approach, we can really help think about how we can kind of enhance collaboration. The fourth pillar that I'll just speak to now is around our practitioner development. And we've got a number of ways in which we really support individual practitioners and consultants in the model. We also supervision and also development seminars to really kind of bring the model to life. And fortunately, being part of the NHS Foundation Trust here at the Tavistock and Portman, we've got really close links with our colleagues in the Department for Education and Training that have kind of run the D10 Masters programme and the D10D Doctoral programme that we heard from Louise earlier, and also our Executive Coaching programme as well. So I guess that just in summary, really, the work that I've talked to you through today, it's really clear that actually really good sustainable change is more than surface level, and this is what our consultants are able to do, where it's going through the intense process of training and personal development work that we do. Our consultants and coaches that we've worked with here have not only undergone their own kind of professional training, but also their own personal development work. We're all experienced professionals from all sorts of different backgrounds with a range of sectors, and we've specifically retrained to become systems psychodynamic coaches and consultants. We've undergone our own kind of personal work to really understand our own unconscious processes, and that we're committed to this ongoing process of reflection and learning. So how can we help you? Finally, I'm just going to kind of go through our next slide. So hopefully in hearing in some of the ways that we've worked and some of the kind of examples that we've worked with, you might be able to think of a way in your organisation that we might be able to support you to future-proof the NHS while absolutely keeping the NHS pound firmly within the NHS. We're going to break for lunch now, but please do come and speak to one of us during the break or later this afternoon, and we'd be really happy to continue the conversation with you. Thank you very much.